It's almost impossible to believe now, but the world's largest hot desert was once one of its greenest landscapes. This isn't a myth. It isn't speculation. It actually happened. For nearly 10,000 years, one of the driest places on Earth looked completely different. Vast lakes stretched across the landscape, rivers carved through open plains. Hippos swam where today only dunes exist. Giraffes wandered across green savannas. Crocodiles basked beneath trees that have long since disappeared. Powerful monsoon rains transformed the Sahara into a thriving ecosystem unlike anything we associate with the region today. During this extraordinary era, known as the African Humid Period, people didn't merely survive. They turned relentless rain into opportunity. Entire communities settled inside rock shelters shaped by flowing water. Artists covered cave walls with thousands of paintings showing swimmers, cattle, buffalo, and wildlife that no modern visitor would ever expect to find in the middle of the Sahara. Even today, archaeologists continue uncovering their settlements, their tools, and even fragments of ancient DNA, allowing scientists to reconstruct the lives of people who once called this impossible landscape home. Which leaves us with an even bigger mystery. How do you survive when the rain never seems to stop? No concrete, no waterproof clothing, no umbrellas, no rubber boots, only stone tools, animal hides, and whatever nature provides. What happens when every season is wet? When storms return year after year with no forecast, no warning, and no certainty that the sky will ever clear? The answer is far more remarkable than most people imagine. It involves underground water systems hidden beneath the earth for thousands of years. Animal hides transformed into surprisingly effective waterproof clothing. Entire civilizations designed around predictable floods. And one incredible realization. For much of human history, rain wasn't the enemy. In many places, it became the very reason civilization could exist at all. To understand why, we need to begin with the first problem endless rain creates. Surprisingly, it isn't getting wet, it's getting cold. Most people imagine flooding or drowning as the greatest danger. But sustained rainfall creates a far more silent threat. The real killer was something far less obvious, the silent loss of body heat. Water removes heat from the human body far faster than air ever can. A person wearing dry clothing can tolerate surprisingly cold temperatures. The exact same person, soaked by constant rain, can lose body heat so quickly that hypothermia becomes life-threatening within only a few hours. That reality shaped nearly every survival strategy our ancestors developed. The goal wasn't always to stay perfectly dry. Sometimes that was impossible. The real objective was staying warm enough to keep the body's core temperature from falling below the point of survival. This is where one of humanity's greatest forgotten technologies enters the story. Clothing. Not the crude animal skins often shown in movies. Real prehistoric clothing was the product of generations of experimentation. Animal hides were scraped, stretched, smoked, softened, carefully cured over days or even weeks before they were ever worn. When properly prepared, the outer surface naturally shed rain in much the same way water rolls off a duck's feathers. Meanwhile, the inner layers trap pockets of warm air against the body, creating natural insulation remarkably similar to the layered clothing systems used by modern mountaineers today. Many groups improved this protection even further. Animal fats and natural oils were repeatedly worked deep into the leather, creating an early form of waterproof treatment using nothing more than materials gathered directly from the animals they hunted. None of this knowledge appeared overnight. Every technique represented countless generations of observation, trial, failure, and refinement. People learned exactly which animals produced the most water-resistant hides. They discovered how long each hide needed to dry, how seams should be stitched, how openings should overlap to keep rain from creeping inside. Knowledge became survival, and survival became tradition. Shelter was just as important, and ancient humans approached the challenge with far more engineering skill than they are usually given credit for. Whenever possible, they chose caves and natural rock shelters. There is a reason so much of what we know about prehistoric life comes from cave sites scattered across Europe, Africa, and Asia. A cave provides something no storm can easily overcome, a roof already perfected by nature itself. Thick stone walls remained dry even after days or weeks of relentless rainfall, creating a stable environment where people could sleep, store food, protect tools, and keep fires burning while storms raged outside. But not every landscape offered caves. When nature didn't provide shelter, humans built their own. Across many rainy regions, communities constructed homes with steeply sloped roofs, covered in thick layers of reeds, grasses, palm leaves, or whatever local vegetation was available. The steep angle wasn't decorative. It was practical engineering developed through generations of observation. Rainwater rushed down the surface before it could soak through, while each overlapping layer worked like modern roof shingles, guiding water safely away from the living space below. Some communities went even further. Instead of fighting rising water, they simply built above it. Raised houses supported by heavy wooden posts appeared independently across completely different parts of the world. From prehistoric Europe to Southeast Asia, people who had never met each other arrived at almost the exact same solution. If the flood cannot be stopped, move your home above where the flood will eventually reach. Around many settlements, shallow drainage channels were dug using nothing more than wooden digging sticks, stone tools, or animal bones. Although simple, these channels redirected rainwater away from sleeping areas and food storage pits, preventing standing water from destroying supplies or turning villages into disease-filled swamps during long wet seasons. But surviving endless rain eventually became something much greater than simply staying warm or building a better roof. Entire civilizations began organizing their lives around rainfall itself. Perhaps the greatest example is the Green Sahara. Between roughly 14,500 and 5,000 years ago, the African monsoon shifted dramatically northward. Instead of stopping near today's tropical regions, enormous rain systems pushed deep into what is now the Sahara Desert, delivering thousands of years of dependable seasonal rainfall. The transformation was almost beyond imagination. Vast freshwater lakes spread across the desert. Permanent rivers flowed through landscapes that today contain nothing but endless sand. Savannas stretched for hundreds of miles. Grasslands supported elephants, giraffes, antelope, buffalo, crocodiles, and hippos in places where modern visitors struggle to find even a single tree. Rock paintings discovered throughout the Sahara preserve this forgotten world with astonishing detail. They show swimmers crossing deep water, hunters following herds across open grasslands, families tending cattle beside lakes that disappeared thousands of years ago. These weren't symbolic images. They were snapshots of everyday life. Places that seem impossible today once supported thriving human communities for thousands of consecutive years. One remarkable site lies at Takarkori in southwestern Libya. Archaeologists have uncovered nearly 5,000 years of uninterrupted human occupation inside its rock shelters. Layer upon layer of discarded tools, food remains, hearths, and burials reveal an extraordinary record of daily life preserved beneath the desert floor. Even more remarkably, scientists have extracted ancient DNA from people buried there roughly 7,000 years ago. Those discoveries revealed a previously unknown North African genetic lineage that remained isolated for thousands of years while adapting successfully to a climate completely different from the Sahara we know today. The Green Sahara wasn't merely a wetter desert. It was an entirely different world, and for thousands of years humans mastered it. But even the Green Sahara eventually came to an end. The return to desert wasn't sudden. It unfolded slowly across centuries, interrupted by violent swings between extreme rainfall and prolonged drought. Sediment records from eastern Africa reveal repeated dry periods lasting decades, followed by brief returns of heavy rain before the climate shifted once again. For the people living through it, every generation faced uncertainty. One lifetime could begin surrounded by lakes and end beneath expanding sand. No one knew whether the rains had ended forever or whether another wet season would eventually return. So they adapted, again and again. As water gradually disappeared, entire communities migrated with it. Some followed the Nile, others moved toward the Sahel. Many settled around Lake Chad or along the Niger River, carrying with them generations of knowledge about surviving in climates where rainfall could no longer be trusted. That pattern appears throughout ancient history. Rain didn't simply influence where people lived. It determined how civilizations were born, how they prospered, and sometimes how they disappeared. Nowhere is this clearer than the Indus Valley. Around 4,500 years ago, dependable monsoon rains allowed one of the world's largest early civilizations to flourish across the floodplains of the Indus River. The Harappans built carefully planned cities with straight streets, advanced drainage systems, standardized architecture, and sanitation networks that rivaled or even surpassed many societies elsewhere in the ancient world. Their prosperity depended on one thing: reliable rain. Every growing season assumed the monsoon would arrive. Every harvest depended on it. For centuries, that system worked remarkably well. Then the climate began to change. The monsoon gradually weakened. Rainfall became less predictable. Floodplains that had once produced abundant harvests could no longer sustain growing populations. Agriculture declined, and large urban centers slowly emptied as people moved toward smaller settlements closer to dependable water sources near the Himalayan foothills. At almost exactly the same time, another transformation was taking place farther south across the Indian peninsula. For generations, abundant rainfall had allowed many hunter-gatherer communities to survive without permanent agriculture. Forests and natural vegetation provided enough food that farming simply wasn't necessary. Then those rains also began to shift. As the environment became drier, natural resources became less reliable. Communities that had never needed agriculture suddenly found themselves with little choice. Permanent farming villages appeared. One civilization weakened because the rain disappeared. Another emerged because it did. The same climate change produced two completely different human responses. Rain was never simply weather. It was one of history's greatest architects, quietly reshaping societies across entire continents without a single battle ever being fought. There's another piece of this story that remained hidden for thousands of years beneath the ground itself. Ancient humans weren't surviving only because rain happened to fall when they needed it. In many regions, they were unknowingly relying on something far more dependable: natural underground reservoirs. Modern geological research in East Africa's Rift Valley, often called the cradle of humanity, suggests that some of the earliest human populations survived long dry periods because of enormous groundwater systems hidden beneath the surface. Rain that fell during wet years slowly seeped through layers of rock, where it was stored naturally before being released through springs over months, years, or even decades. These weren't tiny trickles of water. They were stable freshwater sources capable of supporting both animals and human communities long after surface rivers had begun shrinking. Certain rock formations functioned like gigantic natural storage tanks. They quietly collected rainfall during favorable years and released it little by little as the climate became drier. Without realizing the geology beneath their feet, ancient people learned something equally valuable through observation. Some places never seemed to run dry. Generation after generation, they returned to the same springs because experience had taught them those waters could be trusted when rivers disappeared and seasonal rains failed. This changes how we understand prehistoric survival. It wasn't simply about enduring whatever weather arrived each year. Success depended on choosing landscapes that could store rainfall long after the storms had ended. Communities living near reliable groundwater enjoyed a tremendous advantage over those relying only on seasonal rivers or temporary lakes. Sometimes survival depended less on human ingenuity than on settling in exactly the right place. Endless rain also created another unavoidable danger: flooding. Once rivers overflowed, staying warm was no longer enough. Entire settlements could disappear beneath rising water. Remarkably, ancient societies separated by thousands of miles developed almost identical solutions without ever communicating with one another. Some of the earliest organized flood management dates back nearly 10,000 years. People living beside major rivers gradually stopped viewing seasonal floods as disasters. Instead, they learned how to benefit from them. Nowhere demonstrates this better than ancient Egypt. Each year, the Nile overflowed its banks and spread nutrient-rich silt across surrounding farmland. Rather than resisting the flood, Egyptian agriculture depended on it completely. Planting seasons, harvests, and even religious ceremonies followed the rhythm of the river. The flood wasn't feared, it was expected. It renewed the soil naturally every year, allowing crops to flourish without artificial fertilizers. But nature wasn't always predictable. Some floods rose far higher than expected. When that happened, even life-giving water became destructive. Ancient engineers responded by constructing dams, earthen embankments, canals, and protective barriers designed to guide excess water away from homes, granaries, and farmland. It required remarkable judgment. Every year they faced the same question: how do you welcome enough water to feed an entire civilization while preventing that same water from destroying everything you've built? That balancing act became one of humanity's earliest engineering challenges, and it remains one of our greatest challenges even today. When we put all of the evidence together, an entirely different picture of prehistoric life begins to emerge. Ancient humans didn't survive endless rain by simply enduring it. They adapted to it with remarkable precision. They engineered clothing that trapped warmth while shedding water. They built shelters with steep roofs that directed rainfall away before it could soak through. They raised homes above floodwaters instead of fighting them. They carved drainage channels around villages. They settled beside springs that remained reliable even when rivers disappeared. And when climates changed beyond recovery, they did something perhaps even more extraordinary. They moved. Entire populations followed shifting rain belts across continents, carrying with them generations of accumulated knowledge instead of remaining in landscapes that could no longer support life. Again and again, human history was rewritten by the movement of water. The Green Sahara became a desert. Communities followed retreating lakes toward the Nile. The Indus Valley prospered under reliable monsoons before its great cities gradually emptied as those rains weakened. In Egypt, predictable floods became the foundation of one of history's longest-lasting civilizations. Across East Africa, hidden groundwater quietly sustained generations long after surface rainfall became unreliable. Everywhere we look, the pattern repeats itself. Rain wasn't merely part of the environment, it was one of humanity's greatest teachers. It forced innovation, it rewarded observation, it demanded flexibility. Those who learned to understand water survived. Those who ignored it disappeared. Perhaps that's the greatest misconception we carry about our ancestors. We often imagine prehistoric people as helpless victims of nature, constantly reacting to whatever the environment threw at them. The archaeological record tells a completely different story. These were skilled observers, patient engineers, expert builders, careful planners, people capable of reading landscapes with a level of precision few modern humans could match. Long before written history, they understood where water would collect, which valleys would flood, which springs would continue flowing after years without rain, which materials kept warmth trapped against the body, which shelter designs survived the harshest storms. Their survival wasn't based on luck. It was based on knowledge accumulated over thousands of years. And perhaps nowhere is that knowledge more astonishing than in the story of the Green Sahara. For nearly 10,000 years, rain transformed one of Earth's harshest deserts into a thriving world filled with rivers, lakes, wildlife, and thriving human communities. Those people didn't merely survive beneath endless storms. They raised families, created art that still survives today, built settlements that archaeologists continue excavating, and left behind genetic evidence that scientists are only now beginning to fully understand. The rain eventually disappeared. The grasslands faded. The lakes dried. The desert returned. But the people endured. They carried their experience into new lands, influencing future civilizations long after the Green Sahara itself had vanished beneath the sand. In the end, endless rain wasn't the obstacle that ancient humans overcame. For countless generations, across multiple continents, it became the very force that shaped where people lived, how civilizations developed, and why humanity survived at all. The next time you picture the Sahara, don't imagine endless dunes. Imagine hippos swimming beneath monsoon skies. Imagine families watching storms roll across vast green grasslands. Imagine children playing beside lakes where only sand exists today. Because for thousands of years, that impossible world was not fantasy, it was home.